Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us tonight Mr. Harry Gross. Harry is a young man of great intellect and generally some claim toward a state of excellence. Is that a faint compliment? But and actually, an interesting thing with Harry is I think his viewpoints generally go toward the left, and in some ways, I like to think I'm neutral, but possibly some observers might think I'm a little more to the right. So it's an interesting view of things. Now, one of the things going on in the country right now is there's tremendous tension between the different factions in the country, and I think the earlier our philosophers and politicians and people that attempted to structure the country as it is imagined this would happen, and at least some people wanted free interchange of ideas. One of them was famously Thomas Jefferson, who thought that if there was free discussion of different ideas and concepts, the good idea would win out. And that was the way to do it, just a free interchange of opinions, and certainly that's embedded in the Constitution. So one of the things that's disturbing, I think, is that often the tensions are so great that, particularly on university campuses, different purveyors of different opinions that have different ideas are basically closed down, and that the ideas there, people resist wanting to hear what they have to say, having already made up their mind on different issues and having an emotional attachment to the opinions they possess. So there we are. That's kind of a springboard for this discussion. And so, Harry, you're on the left. I'll give you that. Maybe you're not, but somewhat there.
Center left.
Somewhat center left. Okay, well, center left field. You're not playing on the sidelines. Well, it looks like that seems to be where most, not exclusively, but most of the of this issue has occurred, and students to the left that have opinions that don't comport with conservative thoughts often try and close things down. That's particularly, and universities accept that. And I'll ask this question, and I'll make the case in a little bit that's understandable, but what do you think about that? Your thoughts about that? I mean, should we suppress?
I think that there is certain speech that doesn't have a place in any good faith discussion. Karl Popper's idea of the paradox of tolerance is really important in understanding why we should regulate certain speech.
Well, why don't you opine on that?
So Popper was trying to understand. He was an Austrian living through the Third Reich at that point, yes. And he observed a lot of the ways that the Nazis took advantage of a tolerant society and free speech, and were able to twist their words. Hans Litten, a German lawyer who had once tried to prosecute Hitler, famously told a jury, "Don't listen to him, he's telling the truth."
Yes.
Because he was just using a trial as a platform for his ideas. Popper took those experiences and said that if a society fully tolerates all speech and has no restrictions, then intolerant speech will always use that to its advantage and win out in the day, because it will be louder and more violent and will make sure that the tolerant side ends up forcing its own demise effectively.
It seems to be just that particular concept is really rooted in a lot of the post-World War I situation in Germany, which was a very contentious kind of situation. And certainly on the left, I mean, I believe the Marxists, the communists there certainly were pretty flamboyant and non-tolerant.
Yes, so I literally taught Weimar Germany this morning in class today.
Yes, well.
So yeah, I mean, you have two immediate communist revolutionary attempts within 3 months
and so the idea is
war.
That the assumption is this is something the right it's their deal. So if you're on the left, you certainly wouldn't like any rightist person to start doing things. Because, as Mr. Popper asserted, they're always going to be the most extreme, and they'll overwhelm the whole story. Now, I think it's a little more complicated.
Well, I think the flip side is true as well, though. I mean,
Well, all right.
if the
I'm
left
glad-
is
right.
if the left is the one espousing violent, intolerant speech of other views, that's also needs to be restricted.
Well, I mean, the whole idea of restriction ought to be very carefully thought about. And so we have these, I guess, the Democrats in the last electoral arrangement attempted to basically have a ministry of truth. And there's a little joke, it's an Orwellian term, is that the ministry of truth. But they thought that whatever thoughts or ideas that are out there, they should be purged of incorrect ideas, and they're the people to do that. So it's very difficult to say when an idea is incorrect. And
Well, sometimes
I mean,
it is, but sometimes it isn't.
Well,
If you tell me 2 + 2 is 5, that's just wrong.
well, if you're doing deductive reasoning, that's right. So if it's deductive, that's an example. But on the other hand, things are pretty complicated. So you could say, well, it's wrong to send, let's say, I don't know, immigrants that have been here for a while, send their families back or whatever. That's just plain wrong. And so therefore that idea should not be put there. If you believe in your heart that there's a moral, which is what we're getting into on each side, the people morally believe that the opinions that are being offered are basically immoral, and they have to be suppressed. The same way if someone said, I advocate killing people, I'm going to shoot people, so that opinion should be suppressed. On the other hand, people that may talk about abortions, they say, well, you're killing, the other side may say you're killing people, therefore I'm not going to let you espouse that. It's morally incorrect for you to say that. And so that's a real slippery slope. And the question is, so it's one that requires a lot of forbearance.
It is. And to defend the Biden administration's attempt to try and correct a massive media misinformation campaign, free speech requires a truly productive society with a healthy exercise of ideas and a marketplace of ideas requires that everyone, 1, be engaging in good faith with each other, and 2, that truth is taken to be the basis for operation. If one side is consistently lying or peddling in half-truths, and the other side cannot negotiate in good faith. And people can't make up their minds in one way or the other. To lose the monopoly on truth in a public discussion is to lose the ability to have political discussion in general. If truth dies in the public forum, there is only violence left.
Well, those are good words. I mean, it sounds good, I would say, certainly. Now, I'll assert this. What people imagine is that truth is like a mathematical kind of concept. 2 + 2 = 4. Okay, that's great. And so I'm a math professor. I can say this is what we're going to go in that direction. But actually, I think pretty much, when people talk to each other, their sort of animal instincts are there attempting to win the argument, to whatever or win from my side, and when they use rhetorical tricks to do that. So a really good rhetorician can really sway things. There are a lot of little rhetorical tricks that can be applied, and so that's what's going on in many discussions. And if you actually listen, if you go through and try and decide what are the facts of the case, as Jack Friday said, or whatever, in Dragnet. Well, just the facts, man. What are the facts? And maybe in law they attempt to go down that path, often with trouble. But so in discussions, saying we're going to take all of the story, all the rhetorical stuff out of it. What are the facts of this issue? Mm-hmm. And it may be that when you get into it, the facts can be stated, mm-hmm. and then the opinion of each person involved in the conversation will be influenced by whatever their self-interest would be. Mm-hmm. So we could say, well, let's put a billionaire tax in New York, a tax on billionaires. Well, if you're not a billionaire, that certainly sounds like a great idea. And indeed, higher taxes are always a good idea if you don't pay taxes. On the other hand, if you do pay taxes, that's an issue. So you could say, you could go through whether to tax people or not, going up or down. And finally, the compromise might be the amount of taxation that's there. So there could be some point where a compromise or an understanding of what the issue is. And I would say the issue is going to be, finally, when you get into going back and forth, the self-interest, generally, the self-interest that each person may have. So, for instance, maybe air pollution. If you own a pulp mill, I think there's one in Macon, is there not? Something like that, maybe.
I know there used to be.
There used to be. But in any event, there's so a lot of pollution and you make some money on it. And on the other hand, so you'd be in favor of it, and if you breathe the air, a person would say, well, I'm not in favor of this. I don't like it. And so how are we going to resolve that? Well, just see if the facts can be stated. The amount of money that's made is $10 million. The amount of pollution is 0.2%. That could be where the discussion would go. But often, because there's the tussle that's going on, the rhetorical tussle, can really escalate into violence, substantial violence. And we see that more and more. And I'll ask this question: do you think that's increasing? In other words, the sharp elbows in life, people tending to want to shoot each other or physically injure a person or do something. Is that increasing in the country? And you have any thoughts about that?
I mean, I think it is. Part of it is I don't think we're all living in the same reality anymore.
Yes.
We're increasingly siloed off from each other in different media environments, in different class environments. This is a product of media conglomeration and oligopoly. It's a product of rising wealth inequality. We don't live as Americans in the same sphere that we lived in even 10 years ago. Definitely not 20 years ago, and certainly not 30 years ago. We don't operate under the same basic assumptions anymore. We don't operate in the same shared faith in the institution. Many people have lost faith in institutions. And when you lose faith in institutions, to be able to resolve differences calmly and apolitically perhaps, and at the very least peacefully, then people begin to turn to violence as a rational solution. And I think that is becoming more and more common because politics has failed in many ways to provide off-ramps to conflicts, and the national rhetoric has just gotten more and more violent over the years.
Well,
it's
really a complicated story, isn't it? So if people are angry with each other and they say, well, some nebulous force is out there, the belief in society, belief in the nature of the country, and then if you subscribe to that, then you imagine that justice will be done. So is it the idea that justice will, in the end, support your side? What happens when justice doesn't? And if people say, well, I'm waiting for the government to come in and do something, and they haven't done it. Therefore, I expect my side to be validated by the government. And if the government is not going to do that, then there's no other. I cannot accept defeat on the issue. So at some point, on some issues, it might be necessary to accept defeat, which is a very unusual on the left and the right. So in other words, maybe it's going to be necessary to, until more facts are there, accept the idea that air pollution is inevitable because people want to build pulpwood factories or the argument for climate change is whatever it is, and you may have your arguments, but there's a way that a person can short staff that, which often happens. In other words, I've got a lot of mathematics here on this subject, but the real deal is the person you're discussing this with, generally this is what the lawyers often do in court, they ignore those facts and they produce their own facts, which is often what happens in arguments. If you listen to them, someone has their talking points, and this is what I think, and the other person has their talking points. and neither of them pay any attention to the other person's talking point. So maybe that would be an interesting way for people to, stop cancel culture a little bit, and let's see what the argument is. So, but if you start the situation, you're going to close the. There are many reasons you don't want the person to come in. Maybe they support Donald Trump. Well, I mean, that would be it. And I've got a MAGA hat on or whatever, and there are some arguments that are going to be presented. But just the instinctive revulsion of many people on the left are different. They won't allow the person to present his or her points. And when we get into that situation, that really is a very bad thing, because there's no commonality possible. There are many other reasons why people are punching each other out, besides, the government's not going to help me, or whatever, on and on. A lot of them is the lack of sympathy for the other person, and the whole in and out way, the in group, the out group, the way that works in the human psyche. We're very instinctive. That's my tribe, that's my person, that's maybe there's a religious connection of one sort or another. And divine will, or God's hand, is appearing on my side or someone else's side, and if God has said something, or a divinity has said something, or you believe that a divinity has a role in the discussion, then, a compromise is pretty impossible. Mm-hmm. So, now, Evan, I don't know if you have thoughts about that. Why can't we compromise is my question.
Yeah. Part of it is you're never going to be able to compromise when there's an existential threat perceived by one side or the other. If one side is articulating a desire to eliminate the other side, there can be no compromise possible, because survival is the fundamental goal of every group. If one side is denying the right to exist to another group, that is fundamentally compromise is not possible. When you look at what cancel culture really is and the way it looks at, particularly on the left, in terms
which
of
is mostly what it is, not always, but just
well,
recently.
I would say there's a very different side between cancel culture in the right wing and cancel culture in the left wing. Cancel culture in the left wing can get very inane and very stupid very quickly, but it's typically rooted in at least some form of trying to apply a social consequence to someone's actions or statements. So people will be canceled for sexual assault charges, sexual harassment, that kind of thing, for remarks that typically dehumanize a group or have articulated violence against a group. Typically, they are not canceled for the content of their ideas so much as the fact that their ideas are based on the premise that someone is less than them or less deserving. On the right, cancel culture tends to largely be we cancel people who disagree with our exercise of power in some way, shape, or form. And we have seen this a lot in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's assassination, and in this second Trump administration across the board, where the right has targeted particularly journalists but also protesters and basically say, if you disagree with us, you do not have the right to disagree, period. That has been articulated by the administration in many ways.
Go ahead.
And there's no way you can compromise with that. Democracy is the art of government by persuasion. It is accepting that you are going to lose at some point and being willing to lose. And when neither side is ever willing to lose because they feel their very existence is at stake, the only other option is to engage in some form of warfare with the other. Cancel culture is the least violent form of that warfare, but it is warfare.
Well, one of the issues, I think, is the exercise of power. You sort of touched on that a little bit. But so if there's a dispute going on, person A and person B, they're going back and on, and there doesn't seem to be any resolution, and they're getting more and more at tenterhooks with each other. The more dominant power person, A or B, can just stop the conversation and enforce the viewpoints. we're not going to talk about this anymore. Your view is on, air pollution or something. We're just going to put, a pulp mill or whatever. I mean, I don't know, some way that air pollution might be happening. We're going to put it there, and if you have, and then we're going to pass some laws that against do anything about this. So their way, and each side would do that. I mean, it's not the right or the left. So one of the things that goes on, particularly in our country, where we've sought diversity. I mean, that's a big. We want lots and lots of different people with lots and lots of different opinions, ideas, prejudices. We want all kinds of people tossed in here, but that imposes a tremendous burden on this discussion, and so often one side or the other, it's just intractable to get some kind of resolution of these conflicts. So the more dominant side can basically find ways to enforce their opinion and the discussion. And there are different ways. Each side can do that in different ways. And that is a substantial problem. And maybe it was not so much anticipated by our founding fathers, the extraordinary diversity we have now. So many people from different...
I mean, I think it was anticipated. Washington himself said that he hoped this country would become an asylum for all those in need
Well, he may have said that, but if you actually, the number of people, let's say the number of Islamic people that were here, or people of substantially different... there was certainly... let's say, for whatever period you want to take, you're in New England or whatever you want to say, the 17th century, well, people were pretty much Christian or whatever.
Well, except for enslaved people. Most enslaved Africans were Muslim when they were enslaved.
Well, I don't know.
This country was built by Muslims.
Well,
fundamentally.
I don't know. Is that a question? So, I mean, my understanding about the way the slave trade started is that slavery was a Muslim institution, particularly.
Slavery was everyone's institution.
I know, but it's particularly, I said, because one of the issues about the way the trade routes were going into sub-Saharan Africa, they were coming from the Islamic countries on the Mediterranean. And so there was certainly that custom was there.
Yes.
And then the Christians were coming in when, particularly in the 15th century, let's say the Islamic people were doing something in the 12th. So
and up to the 15th. By the 15th century, Christian Europe is directly competing with the Trans-Saharan trade. But in 1452, the papacy issued Dum Diversas, which specifically said that Portugal had the right to enslave all non-Christians, and their descendants in perpetuity. It was explicitly religious. It was explicitly Christian supremacist. The Muslim slave trade, the Trans-Saharan slave trade, did not particularly pay attention to religion or race or anything like that. Only the Ottoman Janissary system, which comes much later, the Devshirme system comes much later, did the same thing. But the Christian transatlantic slave trade was largely based explicitly on religious identity and was predicated on the ability to enslave Muslims in particular.
Well, I mean, I won't overkill this. The fact that a lot of this was a religious civil war was underway.
Well, it's not because of the Crusades. It wasn't a religious civil war. It was direct
This is the time
religious war.
the besieging Malta was the Islamic people were pushing. Constantinople had gone to all those things were going on in the 15th century. So there was and the Iberian Peninsula that was. There was a struggle still going on. The Christians were reclaiming that land, and so the idea that it was a competition for souls, I would say that, and I don't know if I necessarily accept the fact that the Islamic people didn't think about that as well. And indeed, if you look at some of the Islamic thoughts about the use of power to persuade people to become Islamic people. That's I think pretty well ingrained, and so I don't think so.
Under the Islamic slavery system, it was a violation of Sharia law to own a fellow Muslim. Muslims could not own Muslims. The same was true for Christians. Christians could not own fellow Christians, and that so there is clear identity. But the sense is that what I'm saying is that the transatlantic slave trade differed from, say, the Mesoamerican slave trade that was going on at the exact same time by the Aztecs and the Mayans, from the Trans-Saharan slave trade, from the Scandinavian slave trade, was that it was explicitly based in a hierarchy of religion and was explicitly supported by religious identity and then later took on a racial.
Well, I won't get too
All of this, all I'm trying to say here is that the vast majority of slaves that were brought over into the Americas, particularly the 1500s and the 1600s, were Muslim. Now, over time, that changed. But the Founding Fathers were very well acquainted with Islam. Very well acquainted.
Well, you can go through different stories about what was going on in the slave ports and the fact that was getting fairly Christianized. There was a Christian group of people for many reasons that were there on the coast, and inland there were Islamic people, and so I would agree that people were not so much Muslim as animalists. In other words, there were pagan religions.
When you get into Central Africa, yes.
Well, no, I think in other words,
Southeastern Africa is largely Muslim. The Sahel is Muslim.
Right, we're sort of off the point, but I'll make one comment is that let's say the religious condition of Liberia in 1300 or whatever, that most people were. They were animalists. The forest guys were there. They followed that, and the number of Islamic converts was probably referable to the use of power and the advantages of being an Islamic person. And so, when the Christian people turned up, there were a substantial number of Islamic people there. But I think I'm not sure how well embedded that religion arrangements were. And
given that you have the Mali Empire is the largest Muslim power in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa at this point, that controls almost all of West Africa for about 2 centuries beforehand. There's been a sizable time period by the time the Europeans arrive for the spread of Islam. Now, as they push further south, and when you get to particularly like the Congo, then it is animism that is the dominant religious identity.
We can debate the subject. I mean, I think
we can debate it, but that's fact. That's what the historical record shows.
Remember, claiming a fact is difficult. So, in other words, if you assert this is a fact, this is the truth, whatever, and in arguments, you could say, well, that's your fact. Let's go through that and let's look at the footnotes, et cetera, et cetera. And often, what's discovered is that there's some complexities about it. It may be, here's a person that observed this with their census. There's a person you claim there was an empire, Islamic empire. That's obviously going to have some kind of impact. Mm-hmm. And the way I started the conversation, or at least said something, was Mediterranean became an Islamic place. The caravan trade going into Africa were Islamic arrangements, and there was no problem at all in slavery in the Islamic world. And there was no moral turpitude about it. It was fine. It could do it.
There was moral turpitude about certain types of slavery. Everyone had quibbles about who could be enslaved versus who couldn't be enslaved.
If it wasn't a big abolitionist movement, as far as I know. And so, and going through the discussion, I think it's important to at least give a certain sense of moderation in looking at the evils of Christianity. So Christianity is doing all kinds of good things, and you mentioned
Islam was also doing all kinds of good things.
Well, I agree with that. And the takeaway,
all I'm saying is rhetorically, you can't say, "Well, he also punched me" to excuse you punching him. You can't look and say, "Well, they were doing the same thing" as a justification for the evils committed by one group.
Well,
everyone is committing evil here. I'm simply saying
that's the point. And so, human behavior. One of the things to understand about humans is the propensity for evil everywhere. I mean, maybe I've made that point. The way it's brain structured. So, if you don't understand that, you're going to really be misled about the way the world is. And I think we're getting near the end of our time here, but swinging back on the notions about arguments. Suppressing different kinds of opinions. I think that is going to have to live with that. That's pretty natural. And then the question is to what degree that suppression is there, and how we parse that out. But I think it's to be expected. And if you look at the country, because in my opinion, because of its extraordinary diversity and differences, where people. their ego is attached to a certain opinion or idea. Well, I live in New York City. It's very expensive to live here. The guys are Marxists are going to make sure I get a better place. I'm going to get a little car. I can ride the buses for free. All these things are going to happen, and that is an attractive idea. But how it plays itself out over time is another matter, and how the country is going to adjust to its diversity is a big issue. And then I think we can both agree that at least having reasonable discussions is a good step forward. And I'll give you the last comment.
I would just say reasonable discussions are incredibly important, but they have to be grounded in a shared reality. Our debate just then is a perfect example of that. We can debate the reality situation, but we were both at least accepting the shared reality of certain historical facts. We can debate the degree of
that's
things.
right. It's the argument. So you can say, I want to hear your points, and probably most of them are wrong, but at least some are right. And so that needs to go into the mix of
exactly. And if we want to have a society where we do have a free exchange of ideas, we need to get back to a place of shared reality.
And I'll let it go at that, but we're almost through with our conversation. Yeah. But the takeaway message is, in general, I'm not sure that concept is easily taught. I mean, I'll just make that. So in other words, when people proceed through life, the idea of that particular way of looking at things is, particularly for a younger person, is not so emotionally attractive. It's much more attractive to demonize the outlier, the out person.
It is.
Right.
It takes work. It
Right.
takes hard work. And it's why we have to be very careful and be very intentional engaging in any discussion.
Well, all right. Harry, thank you for your insights tonight.
Thank you.
And we look forward to doing this again. So thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Right. Thank you.